Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, ZDMS. ZDMS is built for dealerships ready to embrace change and unlock their full potential. Yep. As the industry evolves, outdated systems continue to hold dealers back with slow workflows, limited visibility, and operational inefficiencies. From multi-location management and streamlined workflows to real-time reporting and improved visibility across every department, ZDMS delivers a modern, scalable platform built to simplify operations, increase your efficiency, and support long-term dealership growth, allowing your team to spend less time managing software and more time driving results. Visit zdms.com, that's ZIIDMS.com today and schedule your demo. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dealership Fixit podcast. My name is Jacob, and today we are doing something slightly different. I've got two guests with me. They're both recruiters, both inside this industry, and they are going to tell you the truth about why hiring in your dealership is harder than it should be. So first is Jaye Sanders. She's a talent partner at Dream Team Referrals, placing people across Harley, Powersports, RV, and marine dealerships nationwide. She's also a managing director at Powersports Listing on the M&A side, so she really sees how your team affects what your store is actually worth. Then we got Kevin Elvis Vaughn. Now he just founded Coreline Search, an executive search and leadership recruiting firm for Harley-Davidson, Powersports, Marine, and heavy equipment. And here's the part that I love. Kevin was actually a general manager at House of Harley-Davidson until just a few months ago. And before that, he was a managing partner at Black Wolf Harley-Davidson, and he spent 10 years at Killer Creek, where he was the sales floor all the way up to the GM. So between the two of them, we got both sides of the table covered. Jaye, Elvis, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi.
All right, cool. Well, Kevin, I'm going to start with you, or Elvis, rather. I'll try to call you Elvis. But you wrote something recently on LinkedIn, which I love your content, that I kind of wanted to start with because I think it reframes this whole conversation in power sports. You said that the industry does not have a talent problem; it has a connection problem. You've been back in the recruiter seat for a few months now after years of running the stores. Kind of unpack that for me a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, thank you for having me on here. I think this is going to be a blast. Let's dive right into it, right? So as far as, a dealership goes, someone told me a long time ago, and I know every dealer listening out there will agree on this. We're all selling the same product, and I won't call it the same customer, but customer can go get the product anywhere. What separates a dealership? Sure, geography, the physical location, but it's really the culture inside that dealership. And the dealerships, I think, that do it best are the ones that put culture in the front seat of the bus, so to speak, as far as where their attention is. And so when you start to evaluate customer experience, the CXI, and the overall health of an organization, if you're not looking at it from the experience that your staff is delivering, then you've got a problem that neither myself nor Jay can solve. And no offense, you probably can't either, Jacob. And so with that said, finding the right talent out there, and trust me, it's out there, is just it's not as simple as probably it should be. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that our industry has changed so significantly, not only in the last 2 to 4 years, right? It's changed, in revolutionary ways in the last 10 years. And, I see a lot of, I'll call it cultural conflict, where within the dealership, you've got operators that see it one way. They hire somebody with perhaps a different viewpoint and somehow expect that person to either conform or do it their way, and then wonders why the results that they had hoped or promised don't come to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you said that. And one thing I want to pick up on is you mentioned the CXI. So for anybody listening, that's the Customer Satisfaction Index. And that's what Harley-Davidson produces for a post-purchase, post-service. But it's a traditional survey that the OEM will send to a customer, and you get a grade back on it. How do you use the CXI to do your recruiting and kind of help a certain person in that position get a little better at their job?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a prime example. So I've connected with a number of candidates recently who tout their turnaround on a CXI score. So let's say they've gone into service operation as a fixed ops manager or service manager, and they've inherited, just a really low score. Anything below a 70 would, I think, by all accounts, be a failing grade.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I know dealers that, probably wouldn't sleep at night if they got below about an 84 in service. And so they've gone in and whether it be through rebuilding, training, staff retention, just the overall, again, the experience, right? I can't overemphasize that word. If the customers are getting treated the same, I'm going to, go real shallow here. And I explained this to someone the other day. Why do people go to Chick-fil-A? And it's because the food is consistent and the people are always nice. Your experience is going to be the same, whether you're in an Atlanta or any other location. It doesn't matter. Your Chick-fil-A experience is going to be the same. I'm not saying that dealerships need to run in a cookie cutter fashion, but what I am saying is that two customers come in with two very different needs should get a very similar level of service. There shouldn't be any kind of prejudgment. There shouldn't be any, this guy doesn't come in here very often. That woman doesn't spend very much money for us, and it adversely impact their overall experience. So I think that the dealers have gotten it for a while, but really the staff, these candidates that I'm looking at, are putting a renewed emphasis on CXI because it's front and center in a lot of our conversations.
It's super important. Super important. Jay, from your side, when you get someone on the phone they've got a current job, they're currently employed and they're doing well, and you ask them, why are they even willing to have the conversation? What do you actually say to someone who's in the job hunt?
I ask them what is driving them looking for another opportunity, and their response falls in pretty similar categories. That can look like lack of a culture fit and also work schedule, which I guess would be connected to culture. Most of the people that call me no longer want to work at a dealership that's open 7 days a week.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. How does leadership fall into that? Is that part of the culture fit that you were talking about?
Yes. And, I think that we have a lot of operators out there that work from strategy, but their culture doesn't inform the strategy. So it's backward.
Yeah. Well, on that same vein, Elvis, you do executive and leadership search. So defining the role in your craft, when a dealer calls you and says that they need a high level person to be part of the leadership team, like a general manager or sales manager, how often do they actually know what they need versus just knowing they need to fill an empty chair?
Oh, I would say it's 80% of the time they know what they need. And the number of both operators and general managers that have raised their hand and said, I made a change in my organization 6 months ago. I knew 30 days in that it wasn't the right change. And I've just sat here and crossed my fingers and hoped that it would get better. And it's either a situation that's not fixing it, it's never going to fix itself. Let's, we sometimes, you can have people that are really good in their role, but as Jay just mentioned, it's not a good cultural fit, whether it's a work-life balance, whether it's, the geography relative to where they live. There's a number of factors that go into that, right? And she's absolutely right. I think there is some misalignment, from a strategic versus cultural standpoint. And one of the questions that I get from high-level general manager or GSM or even fixed ops type managers, when I'm asking them, what are you looking for in your next opportunity? A lot of them want autonomy. It just boils down to one word, they're okay operating within guardrails, but they want clearly defined path, and that path can be this wide or it could be, infinite, but they want autonomy.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all enthusiasts. We're just a bunch of motorcycle people who kind of got into this industry, how we got into it. And some of us have done pretty well, and we kind of had a natural knack, or we were trained to be the kind of manager or leader that we needed to be at that time, and we advanced through the ranks. But this is a tough industry for finding a person who's into it as well as that can do the job. Why don't tell me this? Why don't you walk me through how you get a dealer to define the position properly? When you say that they already kind of have a good understanding of what they need, I mean, what questions do you ask them before you go out and find somebody?
I'll let Jay take that one.
I would say that I don't know that the dealers know who they need.
Okay.
And I think that that's part of the turnover issue.
And
So,
so when you're talking to them, what kind of questions are you asking them to help them kind of understand, here's the position requirements, or here's what I'm looking for?
well, I have just a general questionnaire, but back to the dealer not knowing who they need, it's usually because they haven't done an inventory of their current talent.
Mm.
They don't know where the gaps are. And they haven't, or they have this idea that they want a certain personality type, but that personality type is not going to manifest with that skill type. So there seems to be, they need to sit back down and identify what's the most important thing.
Can
So,
you can you give me an example of that? The mismatch between personality and job
um,
requirements?
sure, we'll get the calls. I want a GM that is the face of the dealership.
Mm.
Very charismatic, wants to do events, but that personality type rarely is the person that's going to have extreme ownership of that P&L and know all the KPIs. So sometimes people have this idea that they want everything, but you can't have everything. Just like when you're dating, you're not going to meet that perfect person. So you're not going to find that perfect candidate. So you need to drill down and identify what your company needs to meet their goals. And it's going to be different than somebody else's often.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Let's talk about the flip side of it, for you, Jay. When someone actually leaves, when they want to leave, I mean, the default move is just to replace the same job. Kind of, hey, I've now got this empty chair. How should a dealer, or when should a dealer restructure that role instead of just, hey, I got to find somebody to fill this position that somebody just left?
I think that the job description has to be a living document. And I think that it has to change as, a organization's goals change. I've heard people say, I was just listening to a podcast and somebody was saying, oh, you need a utility player. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and that's true. So maybe you do need to make sure that the person that you hire to work in F&I also has the ability to be a sales manager when needed. Um, and my advice to dealers is that we're like our space is like 20 years behind auto, and they're using behavior assessments, they're using cognitive assessments, and we need to catch up with that.
So you do put a lot of value into those assessments, to help the person hiring understand who it is they're hiring more on a deeper level.
Yeah, I think that you're going to see more success and you're going to have lower turnover if you actually implement those tools and bring them into your hiring practice.
That's interesting. Okay, so an operator or an owner looking for a high level position, maybe they really like the person, they interviewed well, they have the good experience on their resume, but then they don't get a good match on this personality test. How many people take that personality test result as a non-hire versus saying, you know what, I see what this is saying, but I'm still going to hire it based on what I see face value?
Yeah. That's a mistake. And
Oh, okay.
I've had dealers hire based on, I have a lot of great chemistry with this person. I think we're going to do great work together. And they do the testing, and the HR person will call me and they're like, we really should go with this candidate over this candidate. But the owner really had a great rapport with maybe candidate A, and they go with candidate A against the testing. and it doesn't work out because, they say people like we're the most unreliable witness. We have a lot of bias. We like people that are like us. Maybe they have tattoos. We like tattoos. They're cool, or, they watch the same sporting team, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work in your organization. So we can't put as much stock into that. It's not a great way to hire.
Yeah. It's a good tool to have for sure. I agree with you wholeheartedly there that it's another way to look at a candidate that you're going to invest a ton of time and money and resources into filling this super important position within your dealership. But I beg the question of, is everything just going to be this cold and unemotional test result hiring? And, there's a lot of people out there that want to work. And if they're constantly being shut down because they don't fit what this test says is a good candidate for their location, how does that person just leave the industry, or do we find something else for them? I mean, how do you go about these test results that say this is not a good hire when you might think it is? I don't know. I'm just kind of ranting a little bit, but I see it both sides.
Okay. So, just because somebody tests as not a good hire for one company doesn't mean that they wouldn't be a good hire for another company.
Okay.
So that is based on the team dynamics. So this person could be a culture fit. They could be a culture add. So it depends. I've worked with a candidate recently that I placed him, and he did not do very well in the culture. And it didn't work out. The owner and he parted ways as friends, and I found him something else, and he's thriving because he filled a culture gap that was missing.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily like, it's, this person can't go work somewhere else. It's just that they need to go where their lane of genius is needed. Because if you hire somebody that's exactly like you, one of you isn't necessary. So it's interesting. I hope to see, the dealership teams work, in a more purposeful way, but, we'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Elvis, you've been on the dealer side of this for a long time now. When you had an opening, what was that pressure like? And did some of these pressured situations trying to find a candidate to fill one of these gaps, as Jay put it, lead to a bad hire? Or did they, at the other side of the coin, did they lead to a really good hire?
So Jay used a really interesting word that I think really plays to one of my strengths, and that is the utility player. And what I mean by that is sometimes the best candidate is going to show up at your dealership and you don't have a spot carved out for them. You may not be looking for a sales manager. Somebody's either relocated to the area, left another dealership, now their commute's changed, whatever the case is. And if you just looked at it strictly from a mathematical standpoint, you would look that person in the eye and say, man, I would love to hire you, but I just don't have the room on my team now. Good luck. If you really like somebody, they would be an asset to the organization, you're going to figure it out. And sometimes that means making some internal adjustments. So one thing that I think that dealerships should maybe consider, and I have a dealer client right now that's a really good example of this. They've taken a look at some of these traditional job types that they've had in the past, and they're saying, hey, this one over here probably isn't the same manager that maybe we've had 6 or 7 years ago. And now there's a lot of overlap with what this other manager does. And they've done a bit of I hate to use the term mishmash, but they've sort of made these hybrid roles, and the candidate profiles that they're looking at now are wildly different than anything I've ever seen before. And for some people, like Jay just mentioned, it's not going to be a good cultural fit. But if somebody's looking for exposure in an area where maybe they've had a casual interest in a different part of the business, let's face it, none of us are born with this knowledge, and we got to glean it from somewhere, and You take a sales manager, for example. The logical pathway is, sales associate to assistant sales manager to sales manager. That doesn't necessarily make them primed for a general manager spot, in another 5 to 7 years. And so I think these dealerships are actually going to build not only better cultures as a result of this way of thinking, that utility player, but I think long term, they're going to produce a better, more well-rounded candidate that, whether it's with that organization or another, they're going to be poised to, oh, I recognize this is a problem over here in this department. And without that exposure to that department, they would have not even realized there was necessarily a problem. So, I, you know, I think, when you invite a bunch of people into the room, you should probably use all the brain power in that room to solve whatever your world's problems are that day. And, to go back to what Jay was saying, I would agree that most dealers maybe don't necessarily know what they want, but I'll say it with one very important distinction, and I'll defend my 80%. I think dealers are far more today, 2026, mid-year, are far more self-aware and more aware of surroundings than they've ever been. And I think it's because the last several years have given dealers a lot of time to reflect on what's working, what needs changed, and what tomorrow is going to bring. Because, the industry has changed so radically, and I think it will only continue to change. I mean, that's not up for debate.
I like that. Yeah. Always being on for hiring, right? Even if you don't have an opening, it's the always on approach, that, maybe they're not actively looking for somebody, but they can figure it out. I love that. Let's kind of flip that a little bit, right? So you're always on approach. You're talking to people constantly, always trying to fill a new important role. If you can restructure all that stuff. But let's say you still have this open seat, right? You are looking, you're actively looking. You don't want to do a panic hire, but what does that look like on the other side of leaving the seat open too long while you wait for this right person? Maybe it takes a couple months and you talk to 20 people. They don't fit the profile test, or you don't like them, or a combination of both. I mean, what is the harm in leaving a seat open too much and not filling that role?
It's a really great question, and I hate to keep using the word over and over again, but it boils down to your dealership culture. If it's functioning more like a team and less like a family, and Jay's probably smirking because we've had this conversation before, but if it's functioning like a team, everybody knows, like your offensive line's got to shift over, one position, right? And so if your managers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's not only just managing the department, but it's grooming and functioning essentially as a mentor to everybody that reports directly to you. If you've got the team in place, sometimes those positions could remain vacant. I don't want to say for the foreseeable future, but a few weeks, maybe a couple of months even, and the dealership not really lose a lot of momentum as a direct result of that. It doesn't mean that you can continue to function like that in perpetuity, but I think this is my shout out to all staff members in all dealerships across the country. When you've got good organic people on your team that recognize there's a gap. I once did an exercise at Killer Creek where I took a section of chain and I had 3 or 4 people stand up in front of a Saturday morning huddle in front of the entire dealership. And I had everyone standing there, and I took the 2 people out of the middle and sort of shifted them and brought one back and let the other one go in there. And the 2 guys on the end continued to just pull out the slack. And I said, you made my point for me. You're not going to let that chain just drag on the ground until I figure out another solution in the middle.
I love that. That's a good exercise. Jay, any comments on that?
Well, I think that's just a testament to Elvis's ability to hire good people, because I have gotten those phone calls from candidates that say, it wasn't my job.
Mm.
And that's not the guy that you want to hire.
So they didn't want to do any of the additional things to be part of the team, pick up the slack per se, no pun intended. But they just were like, hey, this is not in my job description. I don't get paid to do this. I'm not going to do it. Kind of an attitude.
Right.
Yep. Yep. That's a big problem. All right. Let's shift a little bit into, let's talk about the seasonality, right? So there's obviously a season in our industry for the retail, and you can argue the service and parts as well. But what's the seasonality in hiring and power sports? Are there better windows of time in the year to be looking or filling positions versus others?
Again, it's a good question. I will say that for whatever reason, for me, it would seem from October through December, I see a slight acceleration in candidates' willingness to either more deeply evaluate an opportunity and quite possibly fill a role. I think, right now, this time of year, I think the dealership needs almost become a little secondary. I know I know dealerships and I know candidates that are both saying, "Hey, let me get through my season. Let me get through these next 3 weeks. Let me get through these next 4 weeks. Let's get these kids back to school and then we can start to evaluate really what's going on." I mean, let's face it, the the industry is driven by the seasonality, and I get it. Maybe in some of the southern states, the ebb and flow isn't as significant, but in the northern climates, it's most certainly there's no light switch, but it's that linear curve is much steeper for a dealership in upstate New York than it is for one in Alabama.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, I think Mike Murray coined the phrase, but we're in a solar powered industry. And so the high times usually follow what the sun is doing at that time. No, it's great. Yeah. I mean, what I also see just in my experience here is that, yeah, the northern states, maybe they will not be doing any hiring and even possibly letting a few of their lesser performers go during the cold winter months in the northern part of the United States. And then, come spring, right before that, they're hiring up to fill these roles because they're anticipating, a good spring and summer season. You can almost argue vice versa in the southern states. It's a little slower when it's super, super hot out, 110 degrees here in Arizona. People aren't riding that many motorcycles, at least in the middle of the day. But when you kind of think about it as okay, I'm growing, I need to add a couple people to my team, seasonality, not seasonality. When is it time to add that additional layer to get another producer on your team? I mean, a lot of dealers, they keep adding salespeople when they're looking at the numbers and they're wanting to close more deals, or they're seeing leads aren't getting answered, or it's like, okay, now it's time because of this other metric that it's showing me. What's another good way that a dealer can look at what they're doing now and say, okay, it's time right now, regardless of the season or anything else?
I didn't necessarily coin the phrase, but we're going to pretend for a moment that I did. Power sports amnesia. Dealers need to recognize whenever they think it's an ideal time to hire somebody, they needed to have had somebody in that seat for 9 to 12 weeks prior to that. And if they go back and they look at the historical data, well, let's say service department, prime example, right? In Atlanta, we knew that we were going to have 3 slow weeks, and that was usually the weeks between the Christmas, New Year break and the second or third week in January. And things were only going to start to take off from there, right? So if you know that you're going to need people, in February and March for the influx of business that you're about to get because your sales department's going to be busier, the customers are going to be wanting to get their bikes ready for the riding season, then, the time to hire is obviously not when the customers are 5 deep at your service counter. And everybody sits here on this podcast and acknowledges it, nods their heads and says, yeah, I know that. But, you can take a look at the job ads that are out there and, they'll be quote unquote in season. And then, I got feedback from a candidate just yesterday afternoon. He had applied for a position that was open and vacant at a dealership that they definitely have a season, but it's far more mild than my upstate New York reference. And the dealer waited 6 weeks to contact him. He literally just gotten a phone call and said, "Hey, I was going through some applicants, and yours was sitting here on my desk, ready to call you." You can't be that guy. Yeah. That's going to kill your chances of sourcing what I would say, good quality candidates.
You brought up
Agree.
service here, and I want to get back to that in a little bit, but because technicians is always something that everybody could use more of at every dealership, Powersports, automotive, you name it, anybody that can fix a machine. But before we get into that, Jay, you mentioned to me once that the best candidates are rarely unemployed. And so kind of walk us through what that means in your day to day when you're looking to fill a position because this operator came to you and said, I need this position filled. How do you go about the find and approach when someone's already working and they're not necessarily looking at that moment in time?
Okay, so if they give us a call, it's because they've had a job ad out for, what do you think the average is, Elvis, before people call us? Maybe 3 months?
I would say yes, anywhere between 3 weeks and 3 months. That seems to be the threshold. I would shorten it up just a little bit, but you're all over it.
Okay. So I always tell people if you are relying on the job ad, you're going to get the best of the worst. But if you call one of us, we are actively in conversation with people that are performing, that are recognized in the industry. And we can approach them privately and tell them about an opportunity. And so then you get the best of the best instead of the best of the worst. So that's just what I found to be true.
When you do reach out to somebody to talk to them about this potential opportunity, and they're currently employed, let's say that they're content. I mean, how do you earn enough, I guess, trust or I guess plight to say, hey, I think this would be a good fit for you, even though you're working where you're working right now?
Well, people can be content where they are, but there may be other things standing in the way of promotion for them. They may be working for a family where a son is a GM and they want to be a GM. So there's not a pathway forward for them. So they're looking for a pathway forward for their own goals.
Okay.
So it's not because, they're not happy where they are, but it doesn't offer them the opportunities that they're looking for. And, some people just want to move because they want to move closer to their parents. So maybe I talked to somebody a year ago who they're not unhappy. They are happy, but they need to live in a different part of the country for other reasons. So there's people have reasons for looking for other opportunities other than, I don't like my dealer owner or our culture sucks. Sometimes they can be quite happy, but they do need to move for other reasons.
What about pay? Maybe it's a pay increase. Maybe it's the same. Is that a big factor on how someone would jump?
Not right now.
Not right now. Why do you say that?
Because there were the days that people would call and say, I'm looking for a new GM opportunity, but, I won't take anything less than $350.
Oh,
And
I see.
that's just,
Okay.
That's not a reality right now.
They're shooting for the moon. Well,
Yes.
Well, they
Okay.
see one ad, one time, one place, and I think that's what they should all pay.
yeah.
And what
Okay.
they fail to realize is that they think that every owner is flying around in a private jet, and that's just not the case. They,
Yeah.
some of them are paying their staff and not paying themselves. So
That's so true. A lot of them are family guys that, they put their entire life's work and money into this dealership venture. Let's talk about the other side of that coin, right? So someone's already content. They're where they're at. They've been there for a while. They're a producer. Maybe they want to go with your offer. Maybe they don't. But let's talk about the other side with job hopping. And especially in the COVID days in 2020 to 2023 almost, it seems like people were hopping all over the place because they'll spend 6 months at this dealership and then they get offered more pay or something different at this next one. And it's three different dealerships in 4 years. Is something like that still a red flag to you, or is that kind of an outdated way to read a resume?
I don't necessarily know that it's an outdated way to read a resume. I'll give you an example. I just had a candidate that's got, by all accounts, 4 red flags in a row on his resume. But when you talk to him and you find out exactly what happened, what he was hired to do, what autonomy he was provided, the jobs were mismatched from day one. And shame on them for not recognizing it. I just had a very candid conversation with a good operator just yesterday, and he said that someone had suggested to him, some of these people should probably be willing to sacrifice a week of their time unpaid to go in and work in an organization. I'm not saying that for every position, but they say when you rescue a puppy from the local pound, right? You get that dog home. You don't know what you've got for 6 weeks. And sometimes it's, that takes you that long to, figure out where the second bathroom is in some of these stores. So it's some of these things aren't going to be apparent from day one. And that goes both directions, right? So I think, so much of the industry problem and life's problems could be solved through communication. And I always ask my candidates, because I never want to be the guy responsible where somebody says, yeah, I took this job because Elvis hard sold me on it. He convinced me that was the right move. There isn't a placement out there that's worth that. But I do think that they need to ask some really hard questions. And I'll give you an example of that. When I talk to these people and they tell me that the dealer principal, ignored them on this, didn't do anything about that, I'll say to them, did you just sit down and talk to him? Did you just tell him how you felt? Oh no, he knows how I feel. Did you talk to him? And I had a candidate that I had placed in a general manager seat that called me, and he was choked up. He wasn't crying, but he was choked up, and said, "Thank you for that advice." He said, "I walked in. I said I need to talk to you," and the dealer principal said, "I need to talk to you as well. Close the door." And after about 45 minutes, they were back on the same page, and that's all it took.
That's a great story. Jay, what do you think about the job hopping? Still a big deal, or probably not at all?
Well, I wanted to go back to what Elvis said. I think that if you are an operator and you have somebody that hesitates to come speak to you, that you need to look at your culture, because that's a red flag. But back to the job hopping. Do I think it's an issue? I've seen a lot more of it since COVID. I do think it's an issue, but I do not think that it's the fault of the candidate. Because what I see happening is that there's a mismatch from the beginning. That's part of what leads to job hopping, but also what happens is there is no defined onboarding. So when you don't have a very defined onboarding plan, somebody's not going to be successful. So if you are an operator and you see, you're hiring, people only stay for a year, I would go back and look at my onboarding.
I'll take that from an operator's level.
Okay.
I would agree on the lack of onboarding, and it's evident when you get to your dealership and you say, "Hey, I need to have an email. I need to get into HDNet." Yeah, we'll get to that. That person that handles that is off today, or they're off all this next week. Can you live without it? These are things that should have been done, 4 or 5 days in advance. There's no harm in going in and creating a login for somebody. And when they get there, I think there should be a little packet of information about the dealership, and maybe a reminder, to Jay's point, what the basic job description is. The number of people that accept a position without signature on an actual job description is mind blown.
Mm-hmm.
I laugh because I've seen this firsthand where a dealership, a particularly well-run one, they would hire a candidate for sales usually, or a position like that, and they would go to the back office of the building, uh, sit them down in this chair, put this VHS tape into this, TV VHS combo unit here, and it was an old Ed Lemko tape, and they would hit play. And they would go, okay, I'll be back in 3 hours. Let me know if you need anything. And, just watch this video, take some notes, and I'll come back and check on you. And that was day one. And I laugh because I saw it happening over and over. A lot of those guys did stick around because of what you're saying. The onboarding, it's just not defined on what does day one look like? What does day two look like? How do we get you access to these systems and programs that you need to start your career off in the right way? But Elvis, to kind of keep going on that, I mean, being that you've sat in that seat, when you are talking to a candidate and let's say you do have a good onboarding process, when you're talking to that person, what is the line between them being confident or being arrogant, and what does that cost a dealer if they can misread that stuff?
That's a really good question. I'm probably going to hurt some feelings. Confident versus arrogant. That is, I don't want to say it's a tough one. It's very apparent. And I'll tell you the number one symptom of it is it's no matter what the dealer lays out, this is now time for a very transparent conversation. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's who the players are on my team. This is what my customer base looks like. This is my facility. These are my problems. These are the items that I hired you to come in and fix. And when that person has a solution without listening to the third or fourth bullet on whatever the problem is, you've got an arrogance problem. Oh, I've dealt with that before. I know exactly what to do in that situation. I can take care of that. Give me 24 hours. I can guarantee you whatever the fix is not going to stick. And, it's, I reflect, you talked about the VHS tape. I've been that person sitting there, watching the VHS tape. When somebody had told me, you've got two ears and one mouth, use them in direct proportion with each other. I think that's one of the best operating principles that any employee can do. They didn't hire you to, prove how much you know on day one. It's, how much can you absorb and then come up with a cogent strategy. And it's not, come in and, repaint the facility and, rehire an entire department. That's not what success looks like.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears into a little bit about what we talked about so far, the culture, the reputation of the hiring dealership. Jay, you have actually said before that the dealership reputation is a recruiting strategy. How does a 3-star Google average dealership rating show up in the recruiting conversation versus a 4.9-star dealership?
Wow, that's a good question. It's not really top of mind for many candidates that contact me. I think because there's a belief, be it right or wrong, that the people that actually take the time to go on and complete that Google review are typically unhappy people. So what I encounter as far as, the perception of a dealership culture is it's word of mouth. There are some operators who are known for treating their technicians and paying their technicians extremely well. But that same operator can be known for turning over their GM every 6 months. So people in the industry, it's a very small space, as Elvis will tell you. And, people communicate. And, it's such a small space that we typically know what dealer groups have high turnover in their management structures. So
That's a great point. I think you've called it an internal culture leakage before, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that word that you're the communication, it spreads like wildfire, and it is a small community. I agree with you. I mean, how fast does word like that travel throughout our industry?
Oh, it's fast. I mean, they will tell you, we'll get group thread messages. Have you seen this video? Did something screenshotted for social media? Let me just add one point to what Jay just said, and it's only because I'm telling anyone that's a candidate applying for a job anywhere ever, don't ever go into the interview and as the dealer principal or general manager or the owner's wife starts saying, let me tell you a little bit about the organization, and you cut them off and say, I know, I Facebook stalked you. I know, I went on and looked at your Google reviews. You are more than welcome to go and check out the Google reviews. You can go read every post they've ever made on social media since 2007. But yes, people actually say that. I know, I stalked you. But with that said, I do think people are looking at it because, after we've made an initial contact with the candidate and they've raised their hand and says, yes, I am interested. Tell me more. They find out, either exactly where the dealership is or, for whatever confidentiality purposes, maybe they don't know exactly where. So they're just focused in on a region and, they'll tell you, well, geez, I hope it's not here, and take a look at their Google score. No wonder this dealership would be hiring. So I do think it weighs in there. I think the digital space has given us the opportunity to, whether it's true or not, it gives us an opportunity to at least think we know what a dealership stands for, what it represents, what the customers think about it.
For sure. Jay, back to you. Let's talk about compensation transparency. You had a term in there called the ST clause. What is the ST clause? Help us explain what it is and why dancing around some of these pay ranges kind of kills the recruiting.
Okay, so I say a lot of stuff. I don't remember mentioning an ST clause.
No, I'd have to look that up. That was in your notes. Okay, well, strike that.
But I do believe in pay transparency. And in fact, I was amused the other day. I saw a job ad and it did not have pay. And someone wrote in the comments, I saw a woman write in, what is the pay? And the response was, we don't share pay because pay is based, everyone has a different skill level. And I thought, what that really means is we want to pay you as
little as possible.
As little as possible. Because nobody's going to hire you for what you can do. They already know what they're looking for. They know what the position requirements are. So pay should match that. And also, there are states that require pay. And so I see that becoming like, the wave of the future. A position pays what it pays. And
so
that's...
I'm going to piggyback off what Jay just said.
Based on budget, right? Based on the budget of the dealership. So
yeah.
I just spoke to a candidate yesterday. And this is 2 jobs ago now that he took this particular role, but he took a job. It advertised, a range, and I'm just going to spitball here. Maybe it was 125 to 140, right? And general sales manager, high volume dealership, with a low cost of living. He came in, he performed at or over goal 12 months. He was there 14, 15 months in total. And in his first year, he earned significantly less than the low end of that pay scale. Now, I sit here as a former operator and say, how is that even possible? It's not. And I think the dealers need to be really honest with these candidates, because that will absolutely contribute to burnout, job dissatisfaction, cancer within your store if you're not careful, and high turnover.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see that a lot. And along that same vein, I mean, retention is a huge thing, right? You said this gentleman was only there for 14 months or so. I mean, compensation alone doesn't fix this retention anymore. It's a huge contributing factor, especially if they're making less than what was promised. But I mean, of all the factors, lifestyle, autonomy that you mentioned, trust, schedule, leadership, culture, I mean, which one surprises dealers the most on when you tell them it matters more than money to stick around?
So we are in a industry that's, it's the run towards the fire kind of people that motorcycling attracts, right? We can go back to the, caveman era and figure out, who's going to take the pathway of the motorcycle. And it's people that, they're not risk adverse, to start with. And when you get into a dealership, unless you just inherited it, most of these people have invested their life savings into it. They go into it. And it's a risky proposition, right? You got to hire the right people. You got to treat people properly. You got to have the inventory. You have to, sell it at a fair and equitable price that makes sense for both you and the customer. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. But with that said, if you don't, if you don't go into it every day and think that these dealers don't have, and I'm going to use the word, a little bit of an ego, you're fooling yourselves, right? And sometimes that ego comes out in those conversations. And what I mean is, if somebody comes to them and says, hey, here's why I'm leaving your organization, they're going to find a way, in some instances, and they're going to say, well, you didn't live up to your expectation, or you didn't do your job. And, I've never heard somebody tell me that a dealer looked at him and said, no, you're absolutely right. I was not a good partner to you. I didn't fulfill that promise. I didn't satisfy that end of the requirement. And I think, that's something that, it probably needs discussed and talked a little bit about. And it goes back to that communication, right? A lot of these problems could have been solved with an honest conversation.
That's such a great point. Yeah, the ego, and they try to justify in one way or another why they are leaving because they're not a good fit. It has nothing to do with me, the leader, or my dealership that I'm running. That's such a good point. Let's talk a little bit about what Jay said earlier about the schedule quality, right? 7-day-a-week stores. A lot of these guys are working mandatory Saturdays, always on culture. You're grinding bell to bell, at 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. I mean, what is some of the just lifestyle mix fall into the retention of these employees and keeping them for the long run? What is it costing dealers to constantly filling holes because their people are leaving because of the scheduling?
I don't think, it's this huge percent, that we might think it is. I will say it's most certainly a factor, but if a dealership is staffed appropriately, then the workforce should be able to handle it when somebody elects to take some time off or something like that. I get it. Nobody wants to absorb 25% additional payroll, and I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is, I'm going to go back to the utility player, the person that can, float from a parts counter to an A&L counter to, write some service. These are, people that long term are going to thank you for the opportunity and the exposure. But I think you've got to really evaluate your organization internally. I'm not going to out the dealer group, but I think they do an absolutely incredible job with testing their culture. And what they do is they meet with every staff member in all of their stores once a quarter. Doesn't matter who they are, what they are. And they actually don't meet with their management team until after they've met with everybody else. And what they find is that for the most part, after doing this for year after year after year, is their culture is bulletproof. And it's because people are honest in those conversations. Hey, what's going right? What can we fix? How can I support you in your role? And if the conversation consistently comes back to, well, I brought up this concern to my manager 4 months ago and nothing's been done about it, and it's a problem. And let me show you here in the evidence, whether it's through metrics or customer satisfaction, a dealer can't ignore that. So I encourage every dealer listening to this, go interview your staff, go have candid conversations, take them for a coffee, buy them lunch.
Definitely.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Anything to add to that, Jay?
I completely agree with what Elvis said. There needs to be more conversation. There needs to be more coffee talk, because most negative feelings that your staff has is a lack of information. And operators don't do a very good job of communicating their strategy, their goals, or just communicating the culture. And so the culture needs to be reiterated many, many times as they individually meet with their staff and as they meet with their management team. It should be top of mind. And I'd even go a step further and say that they should have identified people that they consider their culture champions. So I think that should be rewarded. And I do think that people who operate within the culture should be rewarded and acknowledged.
I love that.
Yeah. I had a Chrome consultant, a female Chrome consultant, and her favorite line for a customer would be, "If you like it, I love it," and I loved it so much, and it was it just you just saw how people just really opened up to her, and yeah, okay, I'm going to add a backrest to my motorcycle, and $6,000-7,000 later, well, what changed? They liked her, they trusted her, she knew her stuff, but it was that I like it, I love it, you like it, I love it mentality that she had, that the customer was always right, so to speak, right? So it developed trust very quickly, and it paid massive dividends for her. I thought, how can you apply that in an organization? So what I did is I polled all my managers at House of Harley-Davidson, and I said, listen, what's the top 5 things that matter most to you? And of course, everyone leads. Customer satisfaction. Having the right inventory at the right time. Having clean work environment. Whatever it was. They all listed out everything. So I went around the room. Hey, manager X, does this employee on your parts counter know that is the most important thing to you? No. What about over here in this department? Do they know that's the most important thing? No. Your staff likes you and respects you more as a manager than you probably give them credit for. So it's only fair that you communicate what matters to you in just about everything.
Mhm.
Great point. I love that exercise. Well, let's go in the Wayback Machine a little bit here, Elvis. I mean, you were a senior sales rep at Killer Creek. You became an assistant sales manager, then a general manager. I mean, 10 years promoted through the ranks. What did the people above you make that possible? I know you guys we're talking about recruiting and filling positions and finding candidates to place them. But like, if a dealership wanted to build their own rock star from the ground up, similar to you, what do they have to do to kind of fill that person and build them up from the floor level all the way to the general manager?
So it's a really good question, and I'm built just a little bit differently. I mean, at the time, I had a very young daughter, and uh, relatively, newly married, and I knew I had to put in the hours, and I knew I had to put in the work. But I was incredibly passionate about what I was doing. Getting people on their motorcycle, whether it was their 19th new Harley Davidson or their first bike ever in their life. In that moment, that was incredibly special for them, and I was so thrilled to have been a part of it. And I think that really spoke for itself in the number of units sold. Fast forward to the tracking to the general manager seat. It wasn't necessarily what they did, but what I did, and it's the advice that I would give everybody. And it's just to absorb that information. You're surrounded by very knowledgeable people in this industry, and there are most certainly good operators out there, and then there's elite operators. And when you get around one of those elite operators, you're going to recognize it, and you're going to pick something up in a conversation that I don't want to say maybe you're not a part of, but maybe they're just telling you something or explaining something to you. And I think it served me really well. As far as the organization went, there was some discussion, I think at the time of, maybe some growth opportunities outside of our four walls. And at the time that really didn't have necessarily appeal to me. But at least the fact that I was a part of that conversation quietly communicated to me that they saw something in me. I mean, when I started out, and I still remember that first day, selling motorcycles, I had no idea of, where my career was going to go after that. We all think we're going to be good, or pretty decent, I guess, at whatever part of this job we get into. But, recognizing pretty early on that I didn't have all the answers and that there were some smarter people in those rooms really paid dividends for me. So I think as much as anything, it's just having good mentorship. You know, I don't know that my mentors in this industry realized, the impression that they made on me and my career. But it was magnanimous. I can't really fully put it into words. Conversely, though, I think just recognizing that there was some talent in there as far as the development piece of it goes, having those opportunities to move up into those roles. And the whole reason, I went from ASM to general manager was pretty simple. The owner had approached the general sales manager and said, "Hey, this is what I think I'm going to do. Are you okay with it?" And he said, "I am very content where I'm at." Bringing him in, he probably added 5 years to my life, and we didn't realize it. So, and what he meant was I had taken a great deal of stress and workload off of him. And the store had never had an assistant sales manager until I occupied that role. So, yeah, I think it's a little different for everybody. Um, the only advice that I could give anyone is just be patient and just please listen to those around you, even if you don't like what they're telling you, because someday you may be the person that has to make that decision.
You brought up a good point and used the word mentorship. I love that. I've certainly had my fair share of mentors to create the person that you see today in front of you, much like everybody. But I mean, it looks very differently in the dealership compared to a lot of other industries. I mean, what is the prime mentorship role look like in most of our industry? And what's the difference between like teaching someone a job and versus actually developing them for the next one that they're about to have?
It's mindset and boils down to mindset. The amount of, managers that I've had to stop in the moment and reframe their way of thinking about a staff member and saying, just remember, you are grooming the next generation. This person may be, occupying your seat someday. Your legacy is your words and your actions.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah, I would simplify that and say that behavior is a language. So how is our upper management and ownership behaving? Because that trickles down.
For sure. Yeah, I recently had on a guy named Chase Vance, and he said the number one thing that is blocking most people from getting to that next promotion is that they don't train the person behind them. They don't train their replacement. How do you guys see that with your positions where you've seen someone advance throughout the years? Are they always training the next person to take over their role so that they can move on?
I just had this conversation yesterday with a dealer. It's it's funny. The people that are going to advance through the ranks, so to speak, in this industry are the ones that recognize that pretty early on. And I was fortunate that one of my dealer principals had explained his philosophy around that. If you want promoted, I better see you, training the next generation. I better see you identifying top talent within your department and then you starting to, hey, take a look behind the curtain over here. This is how this happens. This is how we place this order. This is, getting that involvement from your team members is critical. So essentially you can't feel threatened in your role.
And that's the big one is you just said it, the next generation, right? Because usually you're going to train your replacement with someone who's younger, someone who could potentially be better than you are. There's a lot of fear there, but what does this next generation of power sports salespeople, technicians, operators, I mean, what does that look like when they're being intentionally developed, or are they just accidentally neglected and they still get promoted anyways? I mean, what's the gatekeeper there from bringing this younger crowd, this newer generation more into the fold, into our industry, and then moving along in this industry for the future?
I want to suggest just for a minute that maybe promotion doesn't always have to be the goal. Instead, I think that maybe we should spend more time, aiming for excellence at the role that they're in. And I do think that that's where, some behavior and assessment testing would come in, because you could hire somebody and they're going to be a great salesperson. Um, they're going to be possibly a great sales manager, but they're never going to be a GM. And so what happens is these guys get into the industry, they're rocking and rolling, they get to the GSM position, and they think, and they'll probably call me or Elvis or someone else and say, I'm ready to be a GM. And what I have found is that I've administered my own testing, and I know they're never going to be a GM. And so I have to pause and I will not send someone into a position they're going to fail at. So I think that we can't just assume that everybody is on this pathway to promotion.
I agree with you that
their level of incompetence.
yes, I agree with you, Jay, that not everybody is built for every role, especially the one above the one that you're currently at. However, that is kind of the promise of the ladder, right? If you're not growing and you're not continually to succeed in your role and then advancing, you kind of are looked at as like, okay, well, you're not really going anywhere in this career that you've chosen in our industry or any other industry for that matter. So I don't know. I think that we're kind of pre-programmed to just get to the next step. It's almost like grade school. It's like, okay, you're in first grade and then you got to go to second grade and then third grade. If you're in sales, you got to go to finance and then you got to go to sales manager. Then you got to go to GM. That's kind of the preconceived notion, I think, in my mind, of the natural progression path for at least somebody that's in sales.
I don't disagree. I did something that I know a lot of people would be unwilling to do. And that was I took a pretty substantial pay cut to go from a top producing sales associate to an assistant sales manager, a position that was untested in that dealership. Not only did I have to, get in there and perform, but, I basically had to invent the role on the fly. And it was, a lot more responsibility and a lot of, OJT, on the job training, right? So I know a lot of people that would not be willing to do that, and that's fine too. It doesn't have to happen that way. But the dealership was taking a chance on me, just like I was taking a chance on that position. Fast forward, I'm incredibly thankful that I sort of checked that box and got that out of the way when I did. But that's not going to be for everybody. I agree that people should strive to be incredibly efficient, proficient in their existing role. But at the same time, though, I do think you can involve your staff in critical decisions, and they have a sense of ownership. And I'll give you an example. I had a marketing manager who was really struggling to be able to solicit promotions in a timely manner. And the drill, right? It's the 29th of the month. The promotion's due in a couple of days, and they've got to get it on all the social channels. They have to have all the graphics approved. They got to make sure that everything is to the letter perfect. And, manager over here is not participating in it. They aren't answering my emails. They won't talk to me. So I encouraged that marketing manager. I said, why don't you take him to lunch? I'll pay for it. Take him to lunch, sit him down, explain to him what the problem is. And the dealer principal overheard me explaining this. Immediately after that conversation, he pulls me aside and he actually had a different solution. He said, why don't you get the marketing manager to take the sales associates to lunch? And I said, I'm not following. Talk to me. And he said, if she lays out what her problems are and she asks for their input and they proffer some type of suggestion, hey, I don't know if you ever thought about it doing this way, but if I were struggling to communicate that with somebody, here's how I would handle it. That person would never let their idea fail. and they're going to work with them hand in hand to ensure that it's done. And in some instances, maybe that means taking something off of a manager's plate. Hey, I know you've got a lot going on. If you can just give me the SKUs that, we're going to promote this month, let me work directly with the marketing manager and start taking little pieces of that responsibility and not necessarily delegating it, but sharing the load. I always think about it, right? We're going through a cafeteria line together. My plate's full. You've got a little room over there. I want a second chocolate milk, would you mind carrying it? We're going to the same place.
Always want a second chocolate milk. All right. Let's kind of land the plane here, guys. Thank you so much for your time. This has been super insightful. And I just want to kind of close out with two just very last questions here. If a GM or a dealership principal is listening to this right now, and maybe they know their hiring's broken, maybe they don't, what is the one thing that they can do in the next week or the next month that they can actually move the needle? Jay, I'm going to start with you.
I would say take a look at your onboarding and really sit down and make sure that it matches your culture. And I would even suggest, thinking outside the box and maybe identifying somebody that I would call an onboarding buddy that was, a culture champion. It would make a big difference.
I love that. Great advice. Elvis?
Mine falls into the same vein, and that is clearly defining the role itself. And that may, the amount of dealers that I see that put the standard boilerplate parts manager role on Indeed straight from Harley-Davidson circa 2018 with no changes is really dated practice. And I think you really need to go in and take an inventory of really what is that person's role. Is there something that a parts manager does in your store that they don't do anywhere else in the country? And that needs to be clearly defined. The other thing too, to piggyback Jay on the onboarding process, I think you have to put in there, whether you're a dealer principal or a general manager, some, I won't call them hoops, but just benchmark testing that you're going to perform. Hey, at day 30, or thereabouts, we are going to sit down for 30 minutes and we're going to talk about your first 30 days in a row. Then we're going to repeat that at day 60 and then again at day 90. And it does two things. Number one, it holds the individual accountable, but it holds you as the leader or champion of your store directly accountable for their success, because failure is not a reflection on your staff. It's on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I'm
on
going to
you.
echo that. I'm going to echo that. I do think the onboarding should be at least 90 days.
90 days. Okay. So what are we doing in those 90 days of this new hire? We just put them on the sales floor. They're shadowing. If it's a service technician, they're following the foreman. What does that look like in most scenarios?
I think it would be individual to the position. And I think that you create a 90-day template. Like people need, a dealer needs to sit down and create that. And it does need to be a living document subject to change.
Okay. 90 days, 3 months. That's a long time to hire a producer that doesn't really start producing for 3 months, yet they're on the payroll. Would they be doing the function? Or would you
Yes.
kind of hold them back? What is kind of some deeper insights on that?
They would be doing the function, but you would still be onboarding, as well with activities. Again, that would be, dependent on the role. But yeah, I do think that 90 days, if you want somebody to stay with you for years, 90 days isn't a very long time. And it establishes culture. They get a sense that you're invested in them. And then also they are, it establishes loyalty.
Loyalty is key these days.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that's the perfect way to end this segment. Guys, thank you. I'll kind of do a little outro here. Jaye Sanders, she's the talent partner at Dream Team Referrals. And we've got Kevin Elvis Vaughn. He's the founder and managing partner at Coreline Search. So if you're a dealer and you need to make a hire, or you have a candidate open to a confidential conversation, reach out to either one of them. Jay, how can people get a hold of you?
They can preferably call me on the phone. I get a lot of text messages, so I do reply to text, but just the old-fashioned way, call me. Let's talk.
Okay. I'll list your phone number here in the comments, so go check that out if you want to give Jay a call. Elvis, how should people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm going to go the other direction. And people can most certainly call me, but, shoot me a text message, send me an email, DM me through any of the socials. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's very active on LinkedIn too. I like a lot of your content, and certainly you put postings out there too. So if I'm actively looking for a position, if I was a general manager or an operator, definitely want to follow your stuff to see if anybody fits. So want to say thank you. And on that note, we'll say bye, everybody. This episode is brought to you by ZDMS. Okay, guys, physical inventory. Most dealers do it once a year. Some avoid it altogether. And honestly, who can blame them? Closing the store for days, paying staff to count parts, and still ending up with inaccurate data, it's a painful process that costs time and money. ZDMS changes that. With RFID physical inventory, 1 or 2 employees can complete a full store count in a single evening. No closing, no disruption. Just pull the trigger on a handheld scanner and walk the floor. No line of sight required, no climbing shelves, no bending under counters, just fast, accurate counts feeding directly into your ZDMS system. And because it runs inside ZDMS's perpetual inventory system, your data is always current. That means better analytics, less obsolescence, and fewer lost sales. This is the technology powersports dealers needed. And ZDMS is the only DMS in the industry to build it. Talk to your ZDMS rep today, or to learn more, visit zdms.com/fixit.